Hello and welcome back to another review, and today I'll be doing my review on episode 3 of The Last of Us Season 1, and this is the Bill and Frank episode. And I was really worried going into this episode because this is the episode that had some divisive reviews, some people saying you'd either love it or you hate it, and this is the episode that we're told changes the story drastically to the original game version. And I was really worried going to this episode, but I'm going to say right now at the start of the review, those worries were misplaced. This episode starts with just straight up Joel and Ellie. No flashbacks, which I'm so happy about. I do not like the cold open, 10-minute flashbacks to the origin of the cordyceps fungus. I know some people really do, but personally I do not. I think it takes away from Joel and Ellie, so it's good to start with Joel and Ellie. And there's some really nice little moments between the two characters, and we get little hints that Joel cares. We see that Joel purposely doesn't want Ellie to see a mass grave. So we have those small things of Joel caring, creeping through. I do really like the little Easter eggs they're dropping, we see Ellie see a game. In the show it's Mortal Kombat 2, but in the game it's just some made up game, and she talks about Riley. I really liked those little bits where they're just referencing the game. The only bit I didn't like about this Joel and Ellie open is I felt the story kind of stops so that Joel can then look at Ellie while they're walking and just divulge a bunch of information that we already know. I just felt the scene when Joel was literally explaining how the fungus took over the world, I just felt it was really pointless, and I really didn't like it because we've already been told this by episode 1 and the flashback in episode 2. We knew how this happened, and I felt like this extra moment here was pointless. Why bother giving us 40 minutes in episode 1 and a 10-minute flashback if you're just gonna do a bunch of kind of information dump here? It seemed a little like the writers were just trying to bash it over our head and try and be like, oh, we don't believe that you would have clicked already how it spread through the flower. It seems like they didn't trust us to understand this. Everyone basically knew the flower theory by the end of episode 1. We're way smarter than the writers gave us credit for, it seems. But the main part of this episode is just a love story between Bill and Frank throughout the 20 years since 2003. We see the day one, basically, how Bill survived the evacuations, how he hid 3 years in, how he built up his base and met Frank, how they fell in love, and we do see Tess one more time and a younger Joel, which is quite good. And it's just basically a very well developed and well acted character story of these two characters just spending their lives together. And I was really shocked of how much I liked this story, because all of this, almost this entire episode, is show exclusive. None of this happens in the game. So going to this episode, I was like, but I watched this, I was like, wow, okay, this is fantastic TV. It is well acted, and I really, really like the story. The only issue I have is when we do see Joel in the one flashback, he mentions how rays are going to come, you're going to be under attack, and then they get attacked once in the 20 years that they lived in that suburb. And they're like, what? You got attacked once? I thought maybe they could have done a bit more with the attack and maybe have it be the big set piece and then have them have their quiet life after. It seemed a bit bull that they were attacked once in 20 years and then it's just kind of done. They get attacked once, the raiders are just being NPCs running into the flamethrowers, and bam. Bill's like, cool, Joel, and bam. It's now 2023. I do think that bit was a bit rushed, but that's not the point of the episode. It is a character-focused episode. And for what it is fantastic. This episode is about 88 minutes long. It's almost as long as episode 1. But it is paced so well. Episode 1 did have some pacing issues, and I really felt like it was 2 episodes smushed together, and I really didn't like it. This episode was perfectly lengthed and perfectly paced. I, at no point, was watching this and being like, when's it ending? When's the next big thing going to happen? It was gripping and entertaining from start to finish. And that is basically because the acting was just so good. The actors for Bill and Frank absolutely carry this episode. And by the end of the episode, you care about both characters. I was a bit unsure about Frank because he's a show exclusive character. He is in the game, but he's a dead body in the game. But I was eating my own words. I just kind of watched it and I was like, wow, they definitely improved upon the game in certain aspects. The acting and the writing was just on point in this episode, and this episode looked and sounded amazing. It just seemed like it was ripped straight out of the game. And it better, because this episode is worth 10 million. Each episode is almost 10 million, so it shows the price of this episode. There are some negatives though, I have to be a bit nitty-picky, but my biggest negative is that it basically just dumped the game for an adaptation that kind of boasted on being all about adapting the game and sticking close to the source material. This episode just said F you to the game and went to go do its own thing. This episode basically dumps the entire Bill Town section of the game and the entire plot that is in the game, with Ellie and Joel meeting up with Bill, them going to look for a car, go into a school, and then meeting the bloaters. It's the big bloater introduction, and I thought we might get a bloater introduction this episode, but no. So I'm really wondering when they're going to be introduced, because we know the next couple episodes will be adapting the Pittsburgh part of the game, which is about the Hunter faction. So where are the bloaters going to be drawn back in? We know they're in this show at some point because we see them in the trailer, so where are the bloaters? We also miss out on some big scenes between Bill and Ellie. None of that happens because they never meet. Bill in the show and the game are just completely different people. I do understand why they didn't do that though, because that part of the game is very much about the infected and it's very kind of gameplay based. And it would be very similar to what they did in episode 2. It would be 2 episodes of them going there. So I do understand why they cut it. It's just sad to see it go. And if we're being really nitpicky, I do have to mention that this episode, even though I absolutely love this episode, it's fantastic. It's so well acted. It's so well written. I have to reiterate that. This episode is basically filler because it adds nothing to Joel and Ellie's story. We get introduced to some new characters in a self-contained story, and Joy just kind of hop in at the end when that story's already concluded. It adds nothing to their story, and to be honest, it could have been cut out because they don't add anything. It is filler, but I'd have to say it's filler well done, so I'm not mad about this filler. And even if I was rewriting this, I wouldn't even change the filler. It is absolutely well done. But the big thing I do want to talk about is the end of this episode. So 3, 2, 1, if you're still here, spoiler talk. So this episode ends with the biggest divergence so far is that Bill kills himself with Frank. Frank gets sick at the end of this episode and he has some sort of degenerative disease, and then Bill and Frank both OD and die by the end of the episode before Joel and Ellie could get there. It does tie back into the game at the end with Joel and Ellie both finding the car. It's just a very different circumstance, but this episode does set a precedent of new characters get introduced and then they die, and it's going to really ruin every new character because we're not going to be emotionally attached to them anymore. The only characters we're going to care about by the end of the season will be like Joel and Ellie, because Bill is one of the few characters that survived their encounter with Joel and Ellie in the game. I definitely think they both should have survived, or at least one of them should have, and they shouldn't have just kept adding on to this kind of thing where new character dies each episode. Now let's move on to my one sentence and one word over review, and I have to say I absolutely loved this episode. I'm going to have to give it a 9 out of 10. This episode had me so worried going into it, but my worries were just kind of misplaced. It was so well written, it was so well acted, so well paced. It was just a perfect self-contained character story in the Last of Us universe, and I really liked it from start to finish. But please tell me down below, what are your thoughts on episode 3? Did you like the massive changes to the source material, or did you hate them? And if you never played the game, what is your opinion on this? I would like to know your thoughts and opinions and everything down below. But this is it for me today, so make sure to like and subscribe to help out the channel, and I will see you at a later date. Goodbye.